start speaking when people are in.
Can you still hear me?
You're good.
Okay, I just take my headset because I think my kids will be entering the home, so that will be better.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, and for some of you, good evening. I'm excited to kick off our workshops today, but before I introduce our first topic speakers, just a couple of items. And video available for attendees throughout this session. There will be a Q&A section at the end of this presentation. Please feel free to enter any questions you have via the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen at any point during the presentation. If you're posing your question specifically to one of our presenters, please indicate their name at the start of your question. And now, exploring the reality of artificial intelligence, AI disruption, with presenters Pia Puolakka, project manager with the Criminal Sanctions Agency in Finland, and Steven Vandestein, corrections technology consultant, researcher at Montfort in the UK. Ms. Puolakka has been working for the Criminal Sanctions Agency since 2012. She started as a prison psychologist and since 2017 has been working in central administration. There, she first worked as a senior specialist responsible for rehabilitative services, including program work, family work, and psychological and spiritual services in prison. In 2018, she was appointed as the project manager of the Smart Prison Project. Her current post includes developing digital services for rehabilitative purposes and leading the implementation of the Smart Prison system. In 2020, she started as the project manager of the RISE AI project that is developing artificial intelligence applications for client work and counseling at the Criminal Sanctions Agency in Finland. Pia is a forensic psychologist and also works as a private psychotherapist. She has done further studies in artificial intelligence and digitalization for the purposes of the current Smart Prison and AI projects. She is especially interested in how digital means can contribute to people's well-being and abilities. Mr. Vandestein is an enterprise architect and technology for corrections expert. He works as a consultant in the area of innovation and technology strategy for prisons and probation services. He is an active researcher affiliated with De Montfort University in Leicester, UK, and as a board member of the International Corrections and Prison Association, ICPA, as the liaison for the Technology Solutions Network within that association. Stephen studied pedagogical sciences at the University of Ghent. After graduation, he started working as a probation officer. With the growth of the organization came the need for better national IT support. As a project manager, Stephen took the opportunity to establish good working IT solutions by trying to understand real business problems and expanding his knowledge. In 2009, he became a certified enterprise IT architect at the University of Antwerp Management School. Stephen is now implementing the principles of IT governance and enterprise architecture within correctional organizations and actively promoting more research in this field. He works closely with universities across the globe to enhance knowledge about the opportunities as well as the risks related to the use of technology in corrections. Now it's my distinct privilege to welcome our Pia.
Thank you very much, Sherry. I hope you can hear me okay. So thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here and that Pia myself can share with you the work we have done the last year on the use of artificial intelligence in prisons. Maybe some of you have remembered my question a couple of months ago internally in the CTA network to get to know much more about how do you currently use AI or plan to use AI in prisons. What we have done together based on that information and additional information we gathered from other countries in the world, mainly in Europe, we have written an article based on literature research and the results of this survey. This article recently, I think last week, has been published in the Advancing Corrections Journal. That's the journal of ICPA, the International Corrections and Prison Association. So we would like to share our knowledge, what we've gathered, what we learned doing this work with you in the upcoming 40-45 minutes. Next slide, please. Yeah. So first of all, I would like to start. I don't know if I can see the slides moving. Can you put up the next slide, Pia, please?
Which slide are you seeing now?
I'm seeing the introduction slide still, exploring the reality of artificial intelligence.
Oh, really? Because I already changed to the next one. Can you see it now?
No, something's wrong. Or is Jerry, do you see the slides correctly?
I also still only see the first slide.
Ah, very strange.
Would you like me to share?
Maybe we can try that because I'm moving the slides myself now, but you don't see it for some reason. Interesting. One moment. Tell me if you see it moving. No.
So no, still not. Sorry.
Okay.
Pia, maybe you can stop sharing and share your entire desktop or something. Again.
Yeah, I pause and resume. Can you see now slide saying introduction?
No, still not. I don't know what's happening.
Okay, one moment.
Possibly,
I stop sharing.
Possibly go back over to the PowerPoint presentation, or like you said, share the entire screen.
One moment. Just 1 minute, I try something.
And if you like, I can go ahead and share it and you can just indicate when you'd like to.
What about now?
That's perfect.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay,
Thank you.
let's continue.
Thank you. Maybe Pia, you can show the next slide. I've done the introduction, I think, and I would like to continue by starting about the meaning of artificial intelligence. Of course, when you do a literature research in this area, it's important to analyze what is in fact the concept of artificial intelligence. Probably you all have heard about it, but we've done some more research on what is really the meaning of artificial intelligence. And remarkably, we see no much argumentation or discussions about the concept artificial in this area. So we find a literature that it's all referring as evidence like to done by machines. But the more contested word of this is the concept intelligence. And intelligence is something that we have to take in count when understanding how this concept is described in the literature and in practice everywhere, as it has typically from its origin something that's only used by human beings at the beginning. And it's hinting notions such as consciousness, which is part of the uniqueness of being a human being. So, however, the capabilities of artificial intelligence are still extremely limited relative to human intelligence, as we read in different literature reviews on the topic. We see that in fact the current capabilities of artificial intelligence are not really much going further than some simulation of human intelligence. And to understand that concepts in the literature, we see three different stages of artificial intelligence, which already hints, in fact, a kind of ambition to go much further using this technology. So if you look at the literature and what we see about artificial intelligence, they make a distinction between what we call artificial narrow intelligence, where machines are capable to execute a specific task or limited set of processes. A little bit more advanced then is the artificial general intelligence, which refers to machines that come closer to simulating or even achieving human level intelligence. And that's the future, and a lot of authors discuss about how long this will take. Some are very ambitious and think this will take a couple of years. Others say that will take a couple of centuries to achieve that. But artificial superintelligence, we could be used when talking about AI exceeding human intelligence, where experts disagree about a lot of AI topics. There is a common agreement that current AI is still on the level of any. We are currently not even close to artificial general intelligence and far away from artificial superintelligence. So in this article, we have used the term AI in the meaning of artificial narrow intelligence. And I think everyone realized today that although we dream a lot about the future of artificial intelligence, we are still really basic when we talk about the capabilities of artificial intelligence. And the next slide is for you, Pia.
Yes, so probably the most popular and widespread AI technique to this day is machine learning or supervised learning, defined as automated statistical technique that works by identifying patterns in available data, the relations of items in the data, and then applying this knowledge to new data and learning from the data. Algorithm here defined as a set of rules. And the larger the data set is, the better AI can learn and discover even subtle relations in the data. And algorithms improve their performance in a given task when more data becomes available. So they learn by themselves to be more accurate. And examples of machine learning, it's broadly used in most of these applications, like predicting phenomena, planning, optimization, and pattern recognition, like in computer vision, speech recognition, and natural language processing, robotics, optimizing the function of large systems, and improving expert systems. And what we did when we wrote the article, as Stephen explained, is that we conducted a literature review about the use of AI in prisons and also about the ethical questions regarding its use. And we used both academic journal resources and other available online sources like news platforms and Congress websites, Congress materials. And then also the Finnish Criminal Sanctions Agency submitted a survey about the use of AI in correctional services to all Europris member countries. And we got 13 respondents from the European region, and then by authors' request, we also got 5 North American jurisdictions to answer, and also 1 Australian and 2 Asian jurisdictions. And the survey had the following questions. Do you currently use AI in your correctional system, and how? Are you planning to use AI, and how? Are you planning or discussing about the use of AI with your agency's management? Do you have concerns regarding risks or ethical questions connected to the use of AI? And have there been any new policies or legislation developed to support the current and the future use of AI in your organization? And first, I'm going to tell about the results of the literature review. So the majority of AI applications in the prison concept are in the realm of security technique. The most advanced applications can be seen in Asian countries like China, where a smart surveillance system is designed to monitor prisoners at every moment, including while they are in their cells. There's a network of cameras and sensors that are capable to constantly track inmates and feed into an AI system that uses facial identification and movement analysis technologies to monitor inmates, and also produce a daily report about each one and flagging if there's any unusual behavior. Same kind of systems are also used in Hong Kong, where there are smart video surveillance systems, monitoring functions that can detect unusual behavior, such as an inmate hurting themselves or collapsing, and then alert officials. And another application is related to the use of data coming from a tracking wristband comparable to fitness wristbands on the market. And these wristbands can keep track of inmates' biometric data and alert officials if it notices anything amiss, including signs that inmates might have injured themselves. Hong Kong prisons also use robotic arms to shift through inmates' feces for smuggled items like drugs. And in South Korea, they use monitor violence and suicide risk of inmates to help workload for human guards. In UK, there's also security cameras that can be used to monitor to stop smuggling of drugs, phones and weapons into prison, and also detect other suspicious behavior. In US prisons, there are systems that use speech recognition technology, semantic analytics, and machine learning software to build a database of searchable words that can flag suspicious calls that might include threats like planning crimes, smuggling of drugs into prisons, or other incriminating information. And image and pattern recognition technologies are used increasingly in CCTV camera systems such as AI-based video analytics platforms. And currently, these AI-driven technologies are developed and marketed rapidly and changing the way prisons monitor their inmates. But many, even if many security technique AI solutions can contribute to staff capacity enhancements and help the workload of staff, there's also a lot of ethical questions related to these solutions, which we will discuss later in this presentation.
Thank you, Pia. Some interesting examples of using AI in the security technique and the security of prisons and facilities. And I'm convinced that since we've done that research already, new applications are there. And we've heard also during the last global ICPA Europris Correction Technology Conference, some additional usage of AI in the context of the security technique. So I think we are convinced that this will evolve further, but we also have looked into another topic where AI is used increasingly, and this is the topic of AI in offender management. But it has a history. With the advent of big data and analytics and AI, the assessment of risks and the operation of criminal justice system are becoming increasingly technologically sophisticated. We found the literature. This is also happening in prisons, where the most common applications of AI technology are evident in the context of risk assessment tools. Those are also the first AI applications in prisons in the context of offender management. And most of these models are based on the original and still dominant risk needs responsivity model of risk assessment. To support this model, the adoption in many jurisdictions of standardized instruments for risks and needs assessments is one of the most important, widespread, and continuing development in the last 20 years in offender management. The ambition of using AI in the context of offender management lies in the desire that we have to improve decision-making related to finding the best trajectory for the offenders regarding their needs and minimizing their risks. For example, the Hong Kong Prison Department states that they are actively developing AI technologies for persons in custody self-management in order to enhance the efficiency of penal operations and even the effectiveness of rehabilitation programs. A recent project in the Finnish Criminal Sanctions Agency, where Pia will talk a little bit more, is developing an AI application for offender management. RISE AI will be a recommender system that recommends rehabilitative services to offenders during their sentences based on the available offender background information, like various criminogenic risk factors. Last year, during the or 2 years ago, during the conference in Lisbon, we heard about a US project, or I think 2 or 3 US projects doing similar things, trying to use the data out of the offender management systems to help us make decisions and guide us with the trajectory of rehabilitative programs. This kind of applications will complement the risk and needs assessments tools currently in use, and thereby improving accuracy of service recommendations made to offenders. Here, accuracy is referring to meeting offenders' needs and reducing their risks for reoffending. Pia will talk you a little bit more about this project later. AI-driven analysis of risk factors and estimates of reoffending are based on statistical algorithms that become more accurate by machine learning, that analyze large amounts of data of individual risk factors and their relationship to reoffending. However, at the same time, these analyses are being criticized. One study found that statistical algorithms in this context are no more accurate than lay people's estimates of recidivism. This study was replicated and extended with nearly identical results, with humans and algorithms performing comparably. However, the last study noted increased performance gaps between humans and algorithms when the information provided for predictions includes a more complex set of parameters and a rich set of risk factors. And this suggests that algorithms can outperform human predictions of recidivism in what they call ecologically valid settings. However, the challenge remains to define what is the meaning of this ecologically valid setting and how far those algorithms can be trusted in decision-making processes that potentially have a huge and pervasive impact on an individual's life, like the length and conditions of a prison sentence or a release. The proponents of algorithms claim that AI-driven analysis and decision-making can correct the biases that are present in human decision-making without allowing heuristic stereotypes, emotions, and other irrelevant but human factors interfere with objective analysis, arguing that algorithms can overcome the harmful effects of cognitive biases. However, evidence shows that algorithms can also easily be biased and start to repeat the same mistakes humans have always done before. This shouldn't be surprising considering that AI is only using the data and weighting defined by humans and can do much more than simulating human statistical decision-making. Studies also show many problems with the data itself, like a lack of enough clean, accurate, or well-documented data. AI-relevant data is often not accessible by systems across organizations, and aging infrastructure with a multitude of different systems makes it difficult to implement AI solutions. Therefore, designing an algorithm for use in a prison context requires thinking deliberately about what we exactly want to achieve and a solid understanding of the human failings they're supposed to be replacing. AI in rehabilitation, is it better than human? It's already, as I explained, contested and basically limited at this point based on the lack of data we have currently in our systems. And also our systems, the data we have in our systems can only be used to do what we have always done. So it's not, IA in fact can be seen as a conservative mechanism because it's based on what we have always done. While decision-making algorithms are already hotly debated, the use of robotic systems is really the crossing of a fundamental barrier for many people. Today, as Pia already explained, robots are already used for specific tasks, besides security tasks in different prisons in China, and Hong Kong, South Korea. Some are discussing the possibility of using AI to address the solitary confinement crisis in the US, for example, by employing smart assistants similar to Amazon, Alexa, as a form of confinement companions for prisoners. Even if these companions could alleviate some of the psychological stress for some prisoners, the focus on the surface of the problem of solitary confinement conceals the debate about the aggravating harm of such confinement, since these companions might actually contribute to the legitimization of solitary confinement penal policy instead of questioning it. This is a remark from many critical authors on the use of AI and in general technology, that it can be used without really helping or improving the source of the issue. On the other hand, considering that AI chatbots, for example, and virtual assistants are already used to some extent in civil healthcare, it is a relevant question to ask if and how these solutions could be used also in a meaningful and rehabilitative way in the prison setting. A good virtual companion is perhaps a better solution than a bad physical one of the risk and high risk offenders until units where rehabilitative practices are competing with the negative prison culture amongst prisoners. This brings us to one of the biggest concerns as it comes to the implementation of artificial intelligence and robotics in society. Occupations will disappear while AI is taking over the job humans used to do. This is in general a very known critic on use of AI. It will replace human beings. It will replace our jobs. But again, for this, the counter argument states that AI is also bringing new occupations, new jobs. One such example is shown and also in the pilot in the Finnish prisons, where prisoners were training in use of AI algorithms, which also shows the possibility to provide prisoners with new jobs related and digital skills to help them successfully re-enter into the modern society and labor market. The literature review revealed that the ethical questions regarding AI are being extensively discussed, which is in our opinion necessary. In-depth evaluation of each implementation of new technology in the prison setting is needed to avoid unwanted side effects. Nellis refers to this by expressing the need to apply an ethics of technology to avoid emerging technologies such as AI, reinforcing the development of even more punitive penal interventions. An increased use of AI in monitoring technologies has the potential to enhance its capabilities and transform its role as a security technique, making monitoring even more extensive and constant than currently. Without proper analysis on what its effect would be on the entire prison environment and culture, the risk is that AI simply generates more monitoring, that it generates more control and even other negative side effects. Constant surveillance can increase a person's stress and anxiety levels and decrease their trust in others. Prison agencies have to make decisions not only based on the quantity of monitoring, but also on the intrusive character of the monitoring sensors. Where do we place those sensors? In cell, like we do in China? On the body? In community areas? When are they used, those sensors? What are they measuring? Location, movement, heartbeat, breathing? How this is measured? Single type like sound, picture, video, specific digital monitor signals? And how long the data are kept? It's also a very relevant question we have to ask ourselves. Real-life monitoring with immediate deletion, for example, is something different than keeping the data to the end of times. Anonymization or other techniques can be used to use the data only for where it's collected and avoid abuse of that data for other purposes. Additional effects of the new digital monitoring and their possibility ethical issues will be revealed in time, we think. Ethical questions regarding use of AI in offender management are also. As we are today very far from having correctional systems that can prevent reoffending, we just have to look at the reoffending rates. We should be careful in trusting systems that are trained based on the data generated from our current prison environments. If there are cognitive biases in the way we analyze offenders' risks and needs, these biases can be easily repeated in algorithms, and in the worst case scenario, even further justified in this process. At this stage, we would suggest AI to play a more modest role and to use machine learning techniques to help us improve our understanding about what works, learn from our mistakes, and play only an advisory role in decision-making processes. The use of AI and robotics in rehabilitative practices in prison has the potential to replace humans in some tasks. However, we don't yet know how replacing existing tasks or jobs by machines is affecting culture and environment in general, or the quality of the intervention in prisons. Face-to-face contacts and human-centered rehabilitation are part of the core values of the modern prison concept. We just cannot throw that away. The development of a set of guiding AI design principles supporting the prison's vision and strategy, including rehabilitation objectives, would help in shaping AI as a trustworthy for the prison context. To gain this trust, that technology should be predictable, responsible, verifiable, respect fundamental rights, and follow ethical rules. The development of such principles and policies, next slide please, can only be done in the broader national and international context where prison authorities are operating. Public authorities and international organizations have only recently started reflecting on these fundamental rights and challenges. The European Ethical Charter, for example, on the use of AI in judicial systems has just is just created. And their environment is just created in 2018, contains the following 5 principles. The principle of respect for fundamental rights. That should ensure that the design and implementation of AI tools and services are compatible with fundamental rights. The principle of non-discrimination. Specifically prevent the development of or intensification of any discrimination between individuals or groups of individuals. The principle of quality and security. With regard to the processing of judicial decisions and data, use certified sources and tangible data with models conceived in a multidisciplinary manner in a secure technological environment. The principle of transparency, impartiality, and fairness. This makes data processing methods accessible and understandable, authorize external audits. And finally, the principle under user control. Preclude a prescriptive approach and ensure that users are informed actors and in control of their choices. Though comprehensive, these principles do not yet describe how it can be assured that AI technologies contribute to the broader safety, offender management, and rehabilitation objective in prisons. As argued elsewhere in other articles we've written before, the construction of an additional ethical model for the prison environment would be needed to guide the implementation of AI-driven technologies. This would need a shift from a retroactive assessment towards a more proactive assessment of how these and other technologies could improve interventions in prisons. So this was the result of our literature research. Let's go and talk a little bit more about the survey. But before to do that, we would like to ask you the same questions we asked different jurisdictions. So Jerry, could you please bring up the poll? We would like you to take a couple of minutes to respond and share with us your experience on artificial intelligence by responding to the same questions we've asked the different jurisdictions across the globe. And we are curious to see if after a couple of months, the results are the same or we already see some changes. Please take a couple of time to respond. It's very interesting to already see in the last couple of months during the events and the conversation I had that the global pandemic crisis also has moved and accelerated the use of technology in this area. So I would be really curious to see if you already see some evolutions on this. Can you see, Jerry, how many already have responded?
We're at 29% voted, so I'm going to give it just a bit more time. Can you guys hear me okay now?
Yes, thank you, Jerry.
Yes.
We're at 44%, going to give it about 15 more seconds.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, going to go ahead and end the polling.
Thank you.
You should now see the poll results.
Yes, and they seem at first sight in line. Eh? Pia, what do you think?
Yeah, I can see it, and actually this result is very similar to what we got from our survey. So maybe I'm gonna go directly to those results, and you can see for yourself how it compares to your answers. So I will close the poll and okay, the questions were the same, what you answered, and yes, it's true that the majority of the correctional services that answered the questionnaire indicated they were not using AI currently. So this is all very new in our field anyway. And that was the same answer you gave, that the majority is not using AI. But however, the majority of the respondents indicated having plans to investigate the use of AI, mainly in the prison operational context as a correctional security technique. So this was also similar to the results of the literature review that in the realm of correctional security, AI is mostly used. And however, not yet in use, the role of AI in supporting offender management and decision-making related to assessments and sentence planning processes is an area that currently sits on the radar of a majority of the respondents too. And also the need for an interest in AI solutions in the future was acknowledged by all respondents, also considering the management level. And also the relevant ethical concerns that Stephen already presented were included in the answers, like biased data sets leading to wrong or inaccurate decisions, fairness, transparency, privacy, and GDPR questions. And most said that there's not yet any specific ethical guidance or let alone new policies or legislations in the field of AI in corrections, but there's definitely a need for this kind of instructions and guidances. And this was seen as very important. But then the jurisdictions that said that they use AI, the only European exception was UK, where natural language processing on case notes and free text is used to identify national and local themes and issues and some actuarial risk scores as part of the risk management processes. And in the UK, machine learning is also used to estimate the rate of violent incidents in prisons, which brings us closer to an area where AI is currently already used in jurisdictions like Singapore and Hong Kong, as already explained in the literature review. And also these jurisdictions were the ones that could mention concrete plans and implementations, and also mention a formal and strategic vision on the use of technology like AI, which is driven from broader national digital strategies on data-driven government or even smart cities. And regarding then the European and North American respondents, only UK mentioned that there was some ethical guidance built upon the Office of AI and Government Digital Service, which was under development. And then I'm gonna tell you a little bit more about the Finnish example of RISE AI project for our new offender management system, where we use AI as a kind of a recommender system in the sentence planning process. And This project actually started when I did my studies in Aalto Executive Education Diploma in Artificial Intelligence. This is my unpublished final work for my diploma. And RISE AI, the word RISE is from the word Rikosseuraamuslaitos, which is the name of the Finnish Criminal Sanctions Agency. So about our sentence planning process, we base it mainly on the Anglo-American evidence-based research on offending and criminology since the 1990s and the so-called what works debate emerging from it. You are probably familiar with the results of the basic results of these studies, and also this most widely used model in risk assessment and offender assessment, risk need responsivity model. And the latest model, the so-called Good Lives model, based on the strengths and level of motivation of offenders as part of the assessment process, is also used in Finland. We of course have our offender database in our own offender management system, and we currently have a new project for our new offender management system too. And this RISE AI is supposed to be included in the new offender management system. And we of course get the data from official documents, but also from our expert interviews. And the process here is that senior coordinators in so-called assessment centers interview all prisoners before their sentence and make them a so-called sentence plan, analyzing and making assessment of the relevant risks and strengths, and then planning objectives of the sentence, like abstinence from substance abuse or control of aggressive behavior, improvement of study or work-related skills, and then also are involved in the service counseling, so recommending certain rehabilitative activities for offenders based on the objectives and the risk analysis and the strength analysis done to offenders. In the assessment process, we already can use some statistical techniques, and there's a little bit AI already included in some of these risk assessment instruments, which you might be familiar with too. But on the other hand, the whole planning and service counseling process is expert view based at the moment. And that's where RISE AI is coming to change this process a little bit. So RISE AI is actually supposed to be a kind of a recommender system. As you know, these recommender systems are one very popular commercial application of AI. But in this case, RISE AI would be recommending sentence objectives and rehabilitative activities to offenders based on the analysis of the relevant background factors, criminogenic factors, and their risk and strength factors. And this is supposed to work as a kind of a recommender system using machine learning as a kind of an expert system assisting expert analysis by humans. This is not supposed to be automated decision making, but rather it should work as an assessment and recommendation tool for the senior coordinators that are responsible for the sentence planning process and assessment of offenders. And of course, in the future, we would also like to investigate how successfully this application could be in selecting the relevant services that actually match the risks and needs, and in this way would reduce the offender's risk of recidivism. And here I'm trying to describe how the process that we now have would change. So we would still base our analyses on the models that we use at the moment, risk need responsivity model and the strengths and motivations model, and base it on our offender management system. And the so-called input data to the RISE algorithm would be the risk factors, strength factors, motivational factors, and other relevant background factors that we can get from offenders. And the so-called output data would be that the RISE AI would list the relevant risk and strength factors. Based on these, it would recommend objectives for the sentence and rehabilitative activities to be taken. And finally, in the end, the expert analysis by our senior coordinators would still exist. So the human's task would be to take into consideration the output data, the recommendations, and then their own expert-based view of the situation of the offender. So to put it simple, let's say we have a very young offender with a substance abuse problem who hasn't finished his studies. The recommendations for objectives would probably be to participate in substance rehab program and to finish your high school or elementary school studies during prison time. And based on these, it would recommend certain activities in certain units. So the AI would also know in which units we are providing our services, which services and activities are available in different prisons, in our closed prisons, open prisons, but we would also use this assessment tool for probations too, if possible. And at the moment, the project has just started, and it's actually we are financed by Finland's Ministry of Finance. And what I think is the best thing here is that so far we don't have any assistance any statistical assistance for the conclusions that we make. We have assessment tools, but then again, the suggestions we made for activities and services are based on our subjective analyses. And this would, I hope this would improve the accuracy of the assessments or the recommendations that we make. And it would help us orient our offenders to those services that are most useful for them, considering their risk factors, considering we are trying to reduce their risk of recidivism. And if we want to study this further in the future, how effective this algorithm is, how we could train it to be better, we could probably look for a number of offenders having complied with the recommendations made, and also our analysis of how they have progressed during their prison time, because this is also what the senior coordinators follow during the sentence. Number of participants we have in various activities in general, number of kind of wrong conclusions that would result in refusals or interruptions of activities. Maybe also some kind of a subjective but structured feedback from offenders. Efficiency of the use of staff resources in sentence planning, because this might help them to make their processes smoother and faster, and possibly also help inexperienced staff to assess and plan offenders' sentence. So it would add quality in the process, in the assessment and planning process. Then we could also use some kind of a risk assessment before and after the sentence, or even recidivism records, if possible, in the future. So there are, of course, benefits and there are challenges. Challenges might be related to the ethical questions we already discussed, but I think this RISE AI would serve as a tool for staff responsible for the assessment and sentence planning process. It would enable them to find support in statistical analysis for their conclusions, maybe facilitate and increase the efficiency of their work, and also help offenders to be directed to those services and activities that best meet their risk levels and needs, and increase the compatibility of the offender's needs and their rehabilitation, and the impact on the risk of recidivism would thereby improve. Better use of sentence time also. Challenges if the senior coordinators don't use this in a right way, as it's supposed to be a helping tool for their work, the technical process might start to steer the process too much. So to the extent that it excludes the offenders and experts' analyses and opinions. And this is the problem with all AI solutions working in this way, that they can be affected by algorithmic discrimination and bias risk, similar to other AI systems. And as Stephen explained, our own prejudices and conclusions are built in the data, so the algorithm might repeat the typical fallacies of human reasoning, the cognitive biases, as we say in psychology. And in the beginning, Stephen already mentioned that we have written an article about the results of the literature review and the survey to jurisdictions, and there's little about this RISE AI too, but otherwise, since the project has just started, we haven't published anything officially yet about the RISE AI itself. You probably have some questions, I hope, and there's some questions for discussion if you want to take a look of these. As said, use of AI in prisons is still rather limited or almost absent. What about the future? What about the ethical and human-centered way to use AI? And if you have any other questions. Do we have time?
Yes, we do have time for a few. So my understanding is that there was a bit of audio difficulty hearing me at the beginning. So number one, can you guys hear me okay now?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so I'll just repeat a bit of the beginning just to say, so if there are any questions for Stephen and Pia, you can go ahead and put those in the Q&A box and we'll get to as many of those as we can in the next 5 minutes. One question that I have for either of you to answer, you hit on this at a couple of different points, and then Pia, you hit it again under the challenges. So humans make machines and then machines try to predict things. So is there, ultimately, do you think there's any way around some of the ethical challenges and the bias that you talked about? Is there a way around that?
That's a very complicated question, Jerry, and no simple answer. I think, as you mentioned, AI is a machine that is created by humans, and the biggest problem I've seen reading the literature and seeing examples in corrections and outside there is that AI started to be used in contexts where it was not designed for. And that it's using data that has not been prepared for creating an AI. So is there a way around it? I think if you design it and you keep it, as Pia mentioned, in not as a unique thing to trust on, but as a tool to extend and to help human decision making and human actions, I think that's the best way around it. So of course, taking all the principles when you design it, evaluate it continuously, but be careful not to trust it as such, and assess the data you have trained the machine on. So I hope this is part of the response. Maybe Pia can add something to that.
Yeah, I think the data itself is just data. It has no, it has nothing else except the data. Then the relations between different items of data, they are statistical. Even this statistical relation is only statistical relation. But where does the subjective conclusion come in the process? That's a good question, and probably this algorithmic bias comes from the human bias when humans are supposed to decide about what relations in the data are more important than others. But I'm also, if I think about the current situation, in the current situation, the human analysis we are making is already subjective. So if we can build AI solutions in the right way, it would help us not to fall in the usual cognitive biases that we have if we base our conclusions only on our subjective views and not on any statistical analysis. So this might also help us to correct our own decision making. So I think there's risks, but there's also possibilities that AI could make our decision making more precise.
Risk versus reward. Thanks. So the next question is, it feels like the EU is ahead of the US regarding ethical standards. What are your opinions? Do you see that in the same way?
I have done some research and also some presentations for the Council of Europe, for example, on this topic. I've done a lot of work on the ethical aspects, and I have to agree. The EU has Europe. It's not only the EU; it's mainly the Council of Europe, which is not the same. I won't bother you with more technical details, but the Council of Europe is leading in the world on the developing guidelines and ethical principles since after World War II. So that's the main issue. And this is not only Europe; it's also supported by US and Canada and other countries across the globe. But I agree. I think I've seen that the White House, for example, also have taken some initiatives. But you see the difference that there it's still, and maybe it has changed with the new administration that I'm not aware of. But you see that there is much trust on the free market and the companies guiding their own in developing ethical principles, whether in Europe it's still a big responsibility on the governments. And I think that's one of the thing that's taking that EU is in head of the developing ethical guidelines and principles.
So in general, the quality of data collections is not a hallmark of corrections. Is this a major obstacle to optimizing AI?
I believe it is. I believe it at this stage. It's very fundamental problem we have if we want to think to run too fast with AI. It doesn't mean that AI could not be used, but in a limited way as Pia, maybe as a recommended business, and also maybe to use to enhance the quality of your data at the long run. AI is not doesn't have the creativity that human beings have, and you can live with that if you use Google Maps, for example, unless you want to go off road somewhere. But it's good. But sometimes, if you work with humans, you have to depend on humans' creativity to do something that is not known, and you create something new, a new decision, a new program, and AI will not propose that because it has not been in the data. So I think it has not to be a real blocker and stop you to use and explore the use of AI, but we have to be modest what can be achieved currently. I don't know, Pia, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I think you had quite a complete answer, but it's interesting to see where this will lead us in the future. But probably to do it in the right way, we need ethical principles, and people need not only superficial understanding what AI is, but once you have deeper understanding of what AI is, you start to understand how easily it can go wrong. So it's important to explain this what AI is to decision makers and politics and people responsible for developing the solutions.
Okay, we have time for one more question. ANI is technically similar to data mining and predictive modeling. Accuracy of results are subject to the parameters chosen, and this influences the model. Are there guidelines on how to choose those parameters?
That's a difficult. I agree completely. As Hannah Fry mentioned, someone who we referenced in our research, artificial intelligence is a really big word, but it's nothing more than in fact a small new technology. If I can say it like that. But parameters are key in this, and guidelines. I think there are not really guidelines. The guidelines should come from what you want to achieve and analyze really in deep what are the parameters. And so if you want to look for guidelines and corrections, I think you have to go behind looking to the literature about AI and technology, but you have to look to criminology and what we already know for decades on how to deal with recidivism and behavioral science and things like that, and look there for the parameters and start with that. Start with what we already know. So I think multidisciplinary research would be a guideline. That's my opinion, and then work together with criminologists, penologists, social behavioral scientists, and technology experts.
Well, I'd like to thank both of you, our two presenters, Pia and Stephen. That was certainly a very interesting and thought-provoking topic. Also appreciate the questions and attendee participation as well. Thank you again, and we'll see you in another CTA session soon. Thanks, you guys. Good evening to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you. Thank you, Pia.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.